Hi, Bill Vales here. Just a little to the north of our town of Littleton, Mass, is the state of New Hampshire, known as the Granite State. New Hampshire has a rich history of mining that has made significant contributions to the cultural, economic, local, regional, and national history. At one time, not that long ago, New Hampshire was the site of some of the world's largest mineral deposits of feldspar, mica, and beryl that could be found anywhere in the world. In this collection of 3 Littleton Rocks on the road shows, we traveled to the site of the Golden Keene Feldspar Mill in Alstead, New Hampshire. At this site, some of the world's largest deposits of feldspar were crushed or reduced in preparation for transport to other facilities for further processing. Surrounding this site are literally hundreds of mines that contributed numerous minerals to the economies of the region and the economy of our nation. We are fortunate in these shows to have interviews with some of the men that worked in the mining industry in New Hampshire, and in particular at the Golden Keene Mill and some of the surrounding mines. These men will tell you their stories of working in the mines, operating the equipment, and their participation in the many phases of the mining process that brought these minerals to the later stages of product. Let's take a look at a few of the specimens of the rocks and minerals we will be talking about in these shows. We will discuss how some of the world's largest mica deposits were used in colonial times as glass and lanterns. Mica became a critical and strategic resource for World War II, which contributed to the Allied victory. And here we see some examples of mica. Beryl is the primary source of the element beryllium. Beryl was also another very strategic resource used in the defense industry. Beryl became a key component in the development of the atomic bomb during the Manhattan Project. Beryl is used today for numerous applications, including electronics, communication, medical, and military applications, to name just a few. This example of beryl shows an example that's really leaning towards the full hexagon, 6-sided crystal shape of beryl. Feldspar is the most abundant mineral in the Earth's crust. Feldspar accounts for about 60% of all terrestrial rocks. Feldspar is an important ingredient in the manufacture of glass and porcelain products. There are numerous other uses for feldspar, including fiberglass insulation, drywall compound, abrasive cleaners, paint, the production of steel, and numerous other products and applications. There are numerous types of feldspar based on their chemical composition. Chemically, the feldspars are silicates of aluminum containing sodium, potassium, iron, calcium, or barium, or combination of these elements. Let's take a look at a few of the feldspar specimens. This specimen here is known as labradorite, and it's no surprise that it's found in Labrador, which is where this sample came from, but it's also found in other places. New Hampshire is one. And if you look at this, you can see there's a beautiful blue sheen to this, blue-green sheen. Another example of feldspar is amazonite. And a lot of this is found in the Amazon region, but again, it's also found in New Hampshire, it's out west, and many other places. And this has a beautiful green, green shade to it. That's amazonite. This feldspar here is known as microcline. And this microcline example was found in Moat Mountain, which is in Albany, New Hampshire. That's the neighboring town of Conway. And you can see here, this is a well-formed microcline feldspar crystal. And also in this matrix is a crystal of smoky quartz. And Moat Mountain, by the way, is known for its smoky quartz. That's called microcline feldspar. This beautiful piece of red feldspar came from Blueberry Mountain in Woburn, Massachusetts. And I have found red feldspar similar to this in places in Littleton. And this is a fairly, not so much a common, but it's fairly widespread throughout New England and other areas. This is a microcline crystal of feldspar, and the interesting thing about this crystal, and the crystal formation in this is really exquisite, in that this exhibits an attribute known as twinning. And the twinning is that the crystals grow in different directions and they interlock with one another. And this is, feldspar exhibits perhaps 7 or 8 different types of twinning. And that's always special, finding something like that. The geologic setting of New Hampshire explains the abundance of mineral resources. The minerals feldspar, mica, and beryl, and other accessory minerals such as tourmaline, and I have an example of tourmaline here. Here's a well-formed tourmaline crystal. See, 6-sided. Again, this is in the hexagonal system. Very well formed. And this was from Groton, New Hampshire. Groton, New Hampshire. And tourmaline and other minerals are common to the pegmatite deposits of New Hampshire. And the pegmatites, this is an example of a pegmatite here. And what a pegmatite is a rock deposit that consists of numerous minerals. And the minerals have been formed because they cool very slowly, very, very slowly, and the minerals get a chance to grow into their crystal structure. And you can see in this pegmatite, we have some mica, muscovite mica. We also have some tourmaline here. We have a lot of white feldspar, which you can see here, the various white. And we have quartz. And just to show you one other example of a pegmatite, on this pegmatite here, which also has feldspar, muscovite mica, we see up here this shade here, this is beryl growing in the pegmatite. So sit back, relax, and get ready for some geology talk. Some interesting history and colorful interviews with some of the men that mine the nearby hills of New Hampshire. I hope you enjoy these shows, and we'll see you next time. Hi, I'm here with John Salo, and John is a New Hampshire,
right?
New Hampshire, right?
Right.
With a lot of history of mines in this area. Hi, John. How are you?
Great. A beautiful day and a nice time to talk it over.
Absolutely, John. Can you give us some idea of your history in mining?
Well, of course, I'm 81 now. I'm born in '33. Grew up in a family that was involved in the timber industry. And grandfather at the time was a worker and a buyer and land for international paper. But on the land that he purchased on his own for going into business for himself, he also acquired land that had ledge and at that time later on had mica and feldspar. And the one that, as I grew up in high school, graduating in 1951 from Toll High School in Newport, the mining industry at that time was really booming in this area. And that would be called part of the Grafton District or Sullivan County District. This one down here is the Cheshire District in the mining. And we were...
So those were mining terms.
They were mining terms where the mines were mainly located in the county and so forth.
I see.
And so they opened a mine up in, well, you have to go to Unity to get to it, but it was up in the corner of the land in Claremont, and it was the Mica Mine, and it was a Sergeant mine, and that was started approximately 1939. Of course, I wasn't old enough to know much about it at that time, but later on, my uncle ran that until about 1943 or 44, and then he went into the Army.
And what were they mining?
They were mining mica.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, that they were purchasing depots. At the time, the government was purchasing mica in 3 depots. One was in Franklin, New Hampshire, one was in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, and the other was in Custer, South Dakota. And so the mica was taken from there, from the mine, to a trim shop in Newport. And there the mica was trimmed, and then that trimmed mica with the different shapes, rectangular, hexagonal, longer ones, triangular, were taken to Franklin, graded and purchased by the federal government. Because most of that mica was being used in the electronics industry. The lower grade mica coming out of the trim shops was generally sent to a shop where it was ground up as a, usually like a lubricant for the Army equipment or military trucks and so forth, because it would stand up against the temperature and was used in the oil, and it would last. Also later on, of course, it got used in the paint industry and was used for the metallic flux in the paints that you get in your automobiles.
I see. So mica played quite a role in the war effort in World War II.
Well, yes, it did, because of the major factor that the mica originally came from India, and it was mined in India for a very inexpensive labor price, and was shipped over to the United States as ballast in freighters. But during World War II, about 41, 42, apparently the German U-boats were operating in the North Atlantic, and it made it difficult to get the mica across. And so therefore, with a chance of the boats being sunk and so forth, they went, and we had the mica here in New England, and became a very big mica producing area.
I see, and we were well aware that there was mica in these hills.
Because we had the history of the Ruggles mine, which is in center part of New Hampshire, north in Grafton.
Yes.
And so, and people knew about it because it was always used as, well, isinglass was used as the parts of a window in a stove. A wood stove had these little windows in them. They were generally isinglass or mica, because they'd stand up against the heat. And so, and people knew about it. And of course, mica was mined for a long time there at the Ruggles mine.
So mica was really a strategic commodity. It
was listed as a strategic material, yes. That, along with not so much the feldspar, although the feldspar has always been used in the ceramic industry, and in the ceramics where you're making sinks or wash tub or whatever, the making, or the spark plugs and so forth in your automobile, and or your silica spar, which was used in your glass industry. So Corning Glass out of New York State was a big purchaser of a lot of the ground up feldspar and so forth. Mica in the feldspar mines became almost like a byproduct. I mean, they were taking out more feldspar, and then they'd run into pods of mica mixed in with the feldspar in the fringe areas or whatever. Yet the Mica Mine up in the Sergeant Mine that we have up in, it's in Claremont, but you have to go to Unity to get to it. That was mainly for mica. And then there were some byproducts there too, the for beryllium. And then, of course, beryllium became a major component of the mining industry.
Yeah, beryllium played quite a role in the Manhattan Project in World War II.
Right. And of course, beryllium in itself was used in the nose cones of rockets on re-entry into the atmosphere because it would stand up against the high temperature on re-entry. And so the shield on those rockets was made up of beryllium.
I see, and I'm sure beryllium is still used.
It is.
To this day. I remember reading that beryllium in the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb,
Right.
was used as a neutron moderator.
Mm-hmm.
It would actually slow down neutrons. They could only have neutrons going so fast for the to maintain the chain reaction. That beryllium, another strategic material. So let me ask you this: so we have in these mines, in these districts, beryllium, mica, feldspar, probably lots of other minerals. What sort of geologic setting is this? I've heard the term pegmatite.
Pegmatite was sort of an all-inclusive name for the rock structure that contained these things you just mentioned. Everything from, well, besides your mica, maybe garnet, you know, a lot of iron-type minerals, apatite, you know, things that right now the rock collectors come out and locate, try to locate, and beryl crystals. It was kind of a story too. You mentioned the beryl. I think along when they began to use the beryllium, people didn't realize the value that the beryl had. And I think, I don't like to say it this way, but I say that I think it was kept a little bit quiet because, well, they did save the beryl out, but they didn't really look for it. And yet, up here in Ackworth, or in Alsted, Beryl Mountain, they went after just beryl in that particular operation. And that mine had, the beryl was in quartz, and I remember going into one of the tunnels, and it looked like if you had one of those corkscrews that you use on a whiskey bottle or something to pull a cork out, you almost could turn it into that beryl crystal, you know, and pull it out, or you couldn't. But I mean, it looked like, because they were hexagonal, that was the crystal structure for the beryl. Generally it was green, although there was golden beryl, white beryl referred to as goshenite. And I do know, this is jumping out of this region, but at the mine up in, just over from North Conway into Maine, the Bumpus, I believe it was called, they had a beryl crystal up there that was taken out. There was something in the vicinity of 15 or 16 feet long and maybe 3 to 4 feet in diameter.
Yeah. Could that be in Harvard University now? Because I think we've seen that there.
I think they did send some of those crystals down.
Yeah, they're spectacular.
Right. And I think there's some from this area too, from Gilson.
Yeah. So the crystals that get this large, what's the characteristic of the crystal formation that makes them get large versus small?
Again, it boils down to, I'm losing my thought in the term here now, but it depends on how fast or slow the pegmatite cools. And the more it cools slower, all these things have a better chance of gathering together.
Gathering and growing.
Right, and forming. And it comes out, if it's a real rich pegmatite in, say, beryl or beryllium, then it becomes to come together. Also, probably depending how long it stays warm enough for this to have a chance to settle out, so to speak, settle out and separate. So it does take time for this stuff to form. And generally, after the volcanism, a volcanic reaction, because it all started as a molten material.
It is magma.
Magma.
Yes.
And so it took time for it as it settled out. And
so, John, we have to keep this to under 4 hours. Tell me, what sort of work did you do in the mines?
Well, as I say, my uncle went off in the Army. My grandfather leased the mine, the Sergeant Mine in Claremont, to a group from North Carolina. They mined it. when I finished school at Keene State College
Yes.
down there, and started teaching. But then I had the summers, and I'd always been a camp counselor in Maine. Of course, Maine has a big mineral
Yes.
situation up in that Nuri.
Beautiful, tourmalines.
Tourmalines up in the, well, that's the Plumbago region up near, in that area of Maine. And there was a lot of, the name skips me anyway, but there are a variety of minerals in the pegmatites up that way.
Yes.
But then after I settled down and got married in about 1959, I began to operate the Mica Mine in Claremont during the summer because I didn't want to be up there during the winter, and of course they used to operate right through the year, but when you're up there on that, it's a very breezy point where you are, you're looking down on Claremont, and you're looking at Mount Scottney over here, and the winds are coming through and things freeze up. It was better to operate at that time during the summer when it was warm enough so you didn't have to fight all the elements.
Yeah.
So that's how I got involved in it. And then, of course, the Feldspar mine over here in Alsted, we were delivering our Feldspar in here to this grinding plant. And just to give you an idea of what we were, most of these mining operations were called hand-picked operation, hand shovel operation, pick and shovel operations. Because you had to pick it up and put it in the truck. You break it up so you could handle it. And I think at the time we were delivering Feldspar into the plant here, if it came up to what they needed, to around $9 a ton. I mean, it was all hand-picked. You weren't making a lot of money. You might make a living if everything worked right.
Yeah.
But as soon as you got iron stain and so forth into your Feldspar, it began to eliminate the use as far as the ceramic part.
Yeah. John, I have to ask you, what did you teach?
I was in the science department in the high school in Keene. I started in the junior high, and I was involved initially in the shop department dealing with woodworking, some electricity and so forth in the junior high, and I started in Rye, New Hampshire. But I was there for a couple of years, then I moved up to Keene. I stayed in Keene for another 28 or 29 years, and I was in the science department. And dealing mainly with the earth science, when I had kids in the earth science class and I'd get a chance in the fall, I would bring them up into this area, and we would start in first thing in the morning and travel to a number of these mines, walking through the woods, and the kids would be collecting minerals to bring back, and then we'd bring them back to the classroom, and they could classify them and so forth.
Yeah. Now, John, I have so many questions. Plate tectonics, the theory of plate tectonics came around, I think, right around the mid-60s, 1965. Now, it sounds like prior to that, you were involved in earth science, and plate tectonics hadn't come around. What were your thoughts going back in time when plate tectonics was introduced?
Well, I guess it also began to relate to the problems like the earthquakes and so forth that we've been having, those that occurred in Asia, in that area. One of the plates, the North American plate, I believe in this area, out in the Atlantic, of course, you've got a plate out there.
We have Iceland right on the boundary.
Right, on the boundary. We have a fault zone, actually, that runs across this area in New Hampshire, across by, if you know where Surrey Dam is down here, south toward Keene. There's apparently a fracture zone running straight across. Now, that's separate from, but it's in the plate, but it's a
fracture within the plate.
Right.
Right. So did plate tectonics provide for you an aha moment that did it first sound that this is a plausible explanation, or was it met with skepticism?
No, it's kind of an explanation. If you think of the Connecticut River, the plate on the western side of the Connecticut River compared to the New Hampshire side, there is a difference in the rock structure and the rock material. You find over in Vermont, you find copper mines. There's north, around up near Thetford, and there used to be a big copper mine. But on the New Hampshire side, you're running into the Feldspar and the mica and the pegmatites. So the Connecticut River almost is part of one plate coming against the other.
Ancient plate boundaries.
Yes.
Yeah, those were ancient terrains.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. This is, my videographer knows that I could go on with this for hours. Right now, we're going to take a break. John, I want to thank you very much for your information, and we're going to get you back to pick your brain some more.
Well, I appreciate being here and appreciate what you're doing, because I think this is part of the history of the regions. And I think people best know what went on in the past and what we have going for the future. And maybe this will help them when they start making rules and regulations to control the environment. They've got to start thinking about what was here and what is happening. And so this, it's a good thing,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, thank you very much, John.
Well, thank you.
This has been an absolute pleasure.
Right. I'm sure it's ongoing.
Yes, it will
Right.
be. Thank you. Hi, I'm here again with John Salo, and John, we're on at a different vantage point. Can you explain to me where we are in the mine complex here, and maybe look this way, and we'll just.
No, it's relatively difficult because when this was all operating, I'm sure there were pictures that we've seen here and things letting us know where things were. But now, since time has changed and materials have been left and moved around, it's very hard to locate your position relative to the original operation. It's almost too bad, although I think we may be looking at something now that indicates that history may repeat itself in some other form, but because these materials are out here, they don't go away, and the demands that people are going to need from minerals from the soil and the things that are available, not that it would come to pass to be in the same location, but in the general area.
Yeah. John, can you explain what this structure is over here? There's a little hump here that.
It looks like what would be the remain of the tailings from the crushed feldspar before it was pumped out. Some of it, of course, is over here on the edge of the pond,
Yes.
and it's fed down into it where the pond is. But this looks to me like it is mainly ground up real fine feldspar, and I think if you dug into it, you would find it pretty well crushed in here.
And the remnants, I see a lot of remnants behind us. What are those remnants of?
Well, probably part of the crushes, part of the buildings and so forth. The huge wall there in the background is probably a good 20 feet high, and it's probably 60, 70 feet long. And I really don't know what kind of a building was on it based on where it is, but it looks to me that it was some supporting structure for this unit, for the crusher and so forth.
Okay, so where we are now, we are lower than where we talked
Right.
before. So part of this operation was taking advantage of gravity.
It was a gravity type of, very typical, because it costs money to raise things up from one level to a higher level.
Yes.
But gravity is probably the least expensive way, and they used all these basic operations of physics to help their operation.
Sure. Mechanical advantage.
Advantage, right.
Okay. Well, I feel like I'm in a little piece of history here. With, you know, at one time it seems that this was a very lively place.
Probably consuming, it was quite a booming industry for the local economy. A lot of people work. The type of jobs back then were hand and pick and shovel type jobs. Things where people had to work with their hands and use their head, but also the technology. Now, of course, technology is coming over and people are quite removed from the physical.
Yes.
But this represents a lot of physical labor.
Yes. Although a lot of physical labor, but a lot of it rooted in science.
Oh, sure, right. Now, the process, whether it be a flotation process or the grinding process, and the volumes that you are handling and the efficiency of the operation, and then how you were producing the heat to to dry the spar out. All these things had to be put into effect, and of course a lot of maintenance too for this plant. Well, actually, if you get back to the old picture, it was quite a inspiring thing to look at that unit going way up the hill.
Yeah, the progression of buildings. Fortunately, we have some pictures that will show our audience of that. But right now, we have to leave it to your mind's eye, explaining it to us, and you've done a great job doing that.
Well, I'm sure I haven't got it all explained. There's somebody say, well, he missed that point, or you missed this point. And that's the way it is. I mean, unless you were right there on a day-to-day basis, you would miss parts of things that are very important, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, we look back and say, gee whiz, you know, there was something going on here. Now, you know, what comes next?
Yeah. John, I want to thank you very much for being with us. Thank you.
Nice talking to you.